Hello, I'm Simon Le Bon. You are listening to the Pantheon Network.
Hey, I'm Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to Music is Not a Genre, the interview edition. Every interview is epic. That's why I do that. This is interview number 37, and of course, it is season 6, episode 31. Yeah, I have it written down here. That's right. It's 31st episode of season 6. I'm very excited for this one. Thank you, as always, for watching and listening. Listeners, go to youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre. You get a video for every single episode of MxG. And watchers, you can go to nickdimatteo.com/musicisnotagenre, and it's got a link to every streaming service or wherever you listen to podcasts. Go ahead there. And of course, I would always appreciate your support at patreon.com/musicisnotagenre. If anything juicy happens here that I can share that isn't part of this interview, it'll be on Patreon. That's my guess anyway. I haven't edited this yet, as you can plainly gather. Today's guest, I'm very excited for. We've been talking in other capacities for quite a while now, and I get to talk to her, put her on the record officially. My guest today is Earhart Charles. Oh, wait, sorry. I read my notes wrong. Amelia Ray. She is a writer, composer, performer with a prolific output of music, amazing music, and a long list of performing credits. You can see all of that at ameliaray.net. And of course, every other link will be on every version of this podcast. Amelia, how are you today?
I'm great.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Yeah, I'm very excited. As I mentioned, we've been talking a lot, through, for those of you who don't know, there's a Patreon singer-songwriters club, and we're a part of that. We've been talking through that. We've been talking through email and on Patreon itself and other capacities, which I kind of gave away the answer to the first question I usually ask, which is, how do we know each other?
Yes, we know each other through the Patreon singer-songwriter club, one of them, anyway.
I guess there are a few, right?
Yeah. So we just happen to be in the same one, and I guess it's been a year now. I'm not sure when you joined, but yeah.
I think it has been about a year. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's great. It's a great way for those of you who don't know. It's kind of like a support group. And initially it was about how can we make our Patreon more robust, but it's morphed into just us talking about all aspects of our careers and our lives and everything. And knowing another singer-songwriter is just supremely valuable, and it really even having nothing to do with the music itself, although that's a wonderful bonus, but just the life you live and everything that you go through. Speaking of which, that leads me to my next question, which can be a very short answer, a very long one. I'm hoping it's the long one, which is, since people, who watch and listen to this podcast don't know you, most likely, tell everyone your story.
My story. Well, it's pretty long. It started, I would say, about 4 or 5. I started performing in church. And then when I was about 8, I heard Ode to Billy Joe, a Bobby Gentry song. And I had to have a guitar because I wanted to play like that. So my parents got me a guitar, and I've been strumming and writing ever since. I wrote some fun pop songs, in junior high, very Debbie Gibson influenced songs. And then in high school, started getting more into Jethro Tull and Rush. The Blood Sugar Sex Magic album came out, and that was pretty influential. I picked up the bass and drums for really the first time then, because I wanted to learn how to play along to the songs, and started writing my own songs. Released my first album on cassette in 1993, same year I graduated high school. And I made it on a karaoke machine. So it had cassettes on both sides. So and I had a drum machine, one that you know with 4 pads or something, so I could do like some rolls on it with sticks. So I laid down the drum tracks, and then I would put another cassette in the other side and do the bass, and put another cassette in the first side.
Yeah.
And layer the guitars and the vocals. So I ended up having, some of the songs probably have 12 tracks on them with backing vocals and all that. And the sound quality obviously was not very good, but I'd done it. And I'd gotten all the ideas that were in my head out onto cassette, and people bought them at shows. So that was kind of, there was no stopping me after that. And I released, I guess, 7 more albums and a lot of singles. I've done some film work, written for film. Mostly self-produced, which has been a detriment to not only to myself but to the quality of the music most of the time. So the last few years, I've stopped producing my own work. I'm just not very skilled, and I like to leave that to the professional. I have much more fun writing the songs and arranging them and putting the parts down. And then, I love to just send it off to someone, and then they work their magic and it comes back and it sounds like it's ready for radio. So, of course, that's much more expensive, so that delays the output. But I'll get there. I'm trying to find a happy medium of productivity and finances to keep up with the productivity. But I describe my music for a long time. I described it as rock and roll because to me everything is rock and roll. I grew up listening to classic country and old R&B and the oldies station, and in the 80s radio was really great because you would hear Hart and George Michael and Dionne Warwick and Neil Diamond and Poison at times, all on the same radio station. So it was much more diverse. Mainstream music was much more diverse. And, to my 10-year-old brain, that's just the way that life was. I didn't hear any difference. I didn't see any difference. So now being asked to define a genre is a very frustrating question. So for a long time, I said rock and roll. And then people thought, they were like, oh, Lita Ford. Actually, nobody ever said that. But in my mind, I was hoping somebody would ask me. And I was like, no, not like Lita Ford. And then I was kind of settled on Lenny Kravitz because of the hair and, I'm black and I play rock and roll. So I was like, maybe they'll understand, that translates a little better. And I guess in the last 4 years or so, I've been going with soul rock. And that allows me a great deal of room to move about, because a lot can fall under that. So I played a show yesterday and someone said, what do you call this? Is it folklore? Is it Americana? Is it soul folk? And I was like, yeah, sure. Yeah, whatever you want.
Yeah,
whatever you want, lady. So soul folk is also a kind of good one too, I guess, for especially when I play solo shows. I think that one might get added. Yeah. But that's me in a nutshell.
That was so concise and efficient, and yet you gave me so much. Like this is I think when people tell me their story, it can go very, very long, which I also love, but somehow I have the same amount of notes for what you said as for what anyone else has said, which is great. And I may as well start with kind of the thing that defines this show that you mentioned. I love, first of all, that you call what you do soul rock, because it does, and I say this with love for any musician, it does to an extent define what you do as far as the sound, and no, it doesn't encompass everything, because no label can. But when you think of soul and you think of rock, and each one of those has hundreds of subdivisions, that can allow you such breadth to do whatever you're doing. Yeah. And that's just something that I thrive on as a listener and as a musician, as a fan of other musicians. The reason that I do this podcast, one of the main reasons, I think I mentioned to you, I call what my band Rec does electro power pop, and it's the same thing. Like, what exactly does that mean? And pick one song, and it may not fall into that category very distinctly, but it does cover everything. And cool that when you do like acoustic shows, it's soul folk, and the fact that you're like, hey, whatever anybody else wants to call it, that's totally fine, because that means they're listening and they're digging and they're trying to figure it out, and it's it's kind of sinking into them. But where it seems to come from is a very similar place to where I come from, which is that idea of the mainstream radio and playlists or whatever you want to call them from the 80s were so diverse. I remember seeing from the 80s through pretty much all of the 90s, it was a slow transition. The playlists for radio stations becoming more narrow and targeted and programmatic and all of that. And it didn't quite maybe take to the mid 80s or mid 90s or later, but that was the entire 80s, and even before then was just, like you said, you could hear Poison and then Dionne Warwick and then George Michael, and and when you're growing up with that much of thrown at you, where you kind of couldn't avoid it, unless you were like there were certainly, like in Philly where I grew up, there was MMR and YSP, and they were the rock stations, and then there was Power 99 and WDAS, and they were the hip hop and soul and R&B and all of that. So you maybe are a person who only listened to one of those. But if you listen to like 98 or 103 or whatever it was everything. And they weren't trying to find just one audience. They were assuming that people, like almost all of us, I would imagine, have diverse tastes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I really think it was a golden age. I mean, I know getting to be an old timer, that's going to become a common phrase coming out of my mouth, probably. Oh, the good old days. Yeah. But when you think about the history of radio, at least in the States, how segregated it was pretty much until disco came along. And that sort of desegregated the airwaves, because, you had the soul R&B charts, and then you had the pop charts or the rock charts. And there the twain did meet, unless it was something phenomenal like a Jackson, a Stevie Wonder, perhaps. But they were really separate. And then after disco, things just sort of, because, disco was such a money-making genre that all of the rock people had to make disco songs. And so, that just sort of normalized integration of the charts. And that lasted basically until the rap became mainstream. And then we had to separate again, because some of the rap was too violent, or, and so then, and then the stations started to have more defined, this is the hip hop station, or this is the R&B station for people over 40, and this is the rock station, and that's kind of, I'm just basing this on my memory. So, I might be completely wrong, but in my mind, that's how I remember it, is that it was just this window of time, in the 80s and early 90s. And then after that, it sort of, branched, went back to the way it had been.
I like how you describe that. I mean, I think my memory is pretty much the same, and I've done some research on it. And I guess when this is airing, it will be the week before this, which I will actually record next week. Spoiler alert, behind the scenes. Part of that episode is going to be on kind of the true origins of rock and roll, and how diverse those origins were, and how they all came together in a way to create something that then it kind of was like the big, the big crunch and then the big bang. It all crunched into rock and roll, and then it blew up in all other kinds that came after that. And at the time that all that was developing, you're right. Like radio was so segregated, and there were a handful of people like, Alan Freed and all of that who were doing their best to try to integrate it, but it really didn't take hold in the way you're talking about until like the late 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
And I did an episode on a while back on disco, but really, I think it was called "Where Disco Went When It Stopped Being Disco," because it didn't go anywhere. It just changed into, dance music or high energy or whatever else was going on, and then techno and house and all of that stuff. And that was such a key time for people kind of getting tired of what was happening in the music scene before 76, 77, that you had disco and punk and hip hop and all that all burgeoning, which would make sense that then what results is this mix in the 80s that, as you said, it really was a moment in time. Like growing up, you think, oh, this is just the next evolution of things. Of course, it's just going to be this way,
Right.
And then and then, Clear Channel comes along or whatever else, in the 90s, and it just all slowly disappears.
Yeah. And I always thought it was that I mean, I've never really had this revelation until right now, what I'm about to say, but I have since the 90s always thought that I would never like music again the same way. And I just assumed it was that you have more affinity with the music that was popular when you were in school, which is certainly true. But I do think that this is part of it. Like I stopped listening to the radio. I always say when Jeff Buckley died, but right about 96, that era, I didn't have any interest in listening to the radio. Like 96 and certainly by 2000, I was just about done. I remember the last time I was driving listening to the radio, and it's been 3 times that I've had to pull the car over because the song was so good. And the last time that happened was when Steely Dan's 2 Against Nature came out, and I couldn't drive.
When was that?
That was 2000.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Man.
So I do think it's a function of that, is that it's just, it's I don't want to use the word formulaic, because all popular music is formulaic to an extent, but it's predictable, let's put it that way. You're not going to get a Scritti Politti on the radio. Nothing's going to come and, smack you in the face like that. And so maybe that's it. But yeah, it certainly felt like we were living in the golden era, and we didn't know. We just thought it was the way that things were. And so it was a kind of a rude awakening to discover that it was not the way that things were. And I think I'm still moping about that.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, that brings up so much, but I'm doing this series that I'm like 6 parts through or almost on albums by decade. It's starting with like the history of what an album is all the way up. I made it through the 90s so far, and next week will be the 2000s, or one of these weeks. And what I found was that there were some parallels between the 70s and the 90s that we may be aware of as musicians because we heard that in the music, but it's striking that even in terms of the way music came about and diversified was very, very similar. There was a point in the 70s where, mid 70s, where there were, I mean, a couple dozen #1 albums in the year, which is a lot. And it's not the most ever, but it was a point at which both fans and the industry didn't know where music was going, which is one of the best places to be ever, because then everyone's listening to everything and the industry's throwing everything at the wall because, oh my God, we thought we knew it. And then disco comes along, and then punk, and then hip hop, and then, and then new wave and all this stuff. And then the same thing happened in the early mid 90s when grunge comes along, and what people think of as the golden age of hip hop, and then electronic music starts to blow up, where they were like, oh, we don't know what's going to sell, so why not try to sell everything? And in the mid 90s, there was another year where there were even more #1 albums.
Wow.
Than there were in that given year in the 70s. It was sometime in the middle of the decade. I always forget everything I research, but then what I found out, and this is sort of looking forward, is that just a few years ago, I think it might have been, no, it was 2020, broke the record for the number of number one albums in a given year. And it was like over 40, which just blew those out of the water. So
when you say that, you mean like a number one album is number one for a certain number of weeks or something?
Yeah, so any album to reach number one on the mainstream charts would be considered that, because as you know, there's like dozens of other charts, but that specific chart, anyone that reached number one in that given year. And I mean, there were over 40.
Oh, so. I see. So normally if an album reached, I mean, in years that weren't as prolific with number ones, then an album would stay on the chart for several weeks at number one.
Yeah, so for example, I think 1984, I want to say, I could be wrong, but there were only 5 number one albums, and it was like
We Are the
Rain,
World,
Born in the USA. Right. That's exactly.
Yeah. Okay. I get it.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, that was a pretty stellar year.
Yeah, right. And so you have this period, I guess I'm only thinking of this now as well, which is from that mid 70s to the mid 90s, was the kind of bookended by this explosion of diversity, in the middle of which was this amazing pop music stations playing everything. And I think one of the only reasons why it went in a different direction was the internet, really, was the inability for people started to do that themselves and went away from radio stations. Right. So I don't know. Well,
also, I mean, what you said, or at least the 3 that we mentioned for 1984, We Are the World, or that's the name of the album too. Yeah. Or USA for Africa. I forget which one is the album.
I forget too. Yeah.
Prince. And which album would that have been?
That was Purple Rain.
Purple Rain.
Yeah.
And Born in the USA.
Yeah.
3 extremely different sounds, extremely different markets, extremely different age ranges, demographics, So now do you remember any of the ones from 2000? Is that what you said? There were 40 in 2000?
2020.
2020. Yeah. So
no.
Do you know what any of those are?
No, I haven't done that decade yet, but
you haven't done it yet. Okay.
No, but I'm just
wondering if there is varied in demographic, because if the answer to that one is 1 Taylor Swift album, 2 Taylor Swift album,
right?
And maybe what did you say? 2020. So maybe like a Nicki Minaj and a Cardi B. Then we're not getting as much. Right. Diversity and demographic. I'm just curious.
I can't wait to find out. Yeah.
Yeah. It is great that more albums are having shots at number one.
I think so. And I mean, it does mean something different now because, sales are so different for the last 25 years. Yeah. But I do think it means, once again, people aren't quite sure where music is or where it's going. And of course that has a lot to do with people self-producing. And I want to get into more of that when, a little bit later, and the internet itself. But I also think it has to do with people being tired of being spoon-fed at just one thing. I've seen on Spotify, at least, and I think at YouTube, where people are creating playlists. There's a playlist on Spotify called Pollen, which the entire intent is to not stick to a single genre. And so many of them are popping up now that people are like, well, you know what? You're not doing it. The industry and radio, such as it is not doing it. Okay, I'll do it.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
What is it? Are they, individuals are making them?
Individuals are, but I think Pollen might be an actual group or a small company or something, because they do a bunch of different playlists under that name.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do you? Well, I'm asking for a friend. I'm asking because I curate a monthly mixtape, and I put together 15 songs, a new music, every month, and I put it on Spotify and YouTube, and it's just that it is. without regard to genre or anything. I mean, there's a flow. It's not just randomly put together. It's I put a lot of care into it, but it's all over the map. So I didn't know if there was a certain tag I should be using when I post them. If I should put hashtag pollen or something.
I would add that, and I would maybe, if it's possible, to see what hashtags pollen themselves are using, because
Oh,
they
right.
do
That's
get
a
a
good
a
idea.
decent number of ears, you know.
Okay. I'm
Yeah.
going to write that down. Thank
Okay,
you, sir.
good. So in the, so yeah, so that then this does lead into another note I had here, which is, first of all, the fact that you started recording on cassettes is near and dear to my heart, because that idea of, I had a pretty damn giant boombox with a dual cassette player, and I started out more as kind of like a DJ, so I would be bouncing, like tracks so that I could mix them without pause. And then eventually started to layer things like almost like a mashup type stuff. And then I got a 4-track cassette, recorder. And it was that. It was like, okay, record the drums, which was actually, I'll show you what I recorded the drums on. Yeah, HR16.
Wow.
Still
The
works.
vintage.
And then bass, and then bounce those together, and then do guitars and maybe 2 guitars or whatever, and bounce those together, and then like layer your backup vocals. And it was the same
Yeah.
thing. It was like 12 tracks. And I feel like whether or not someone then takes that and becomes a producer of themselves or anybody else, do you feel like there's something you're learning from crafting a song in that way?
Yeah, I think it took me a long time, but I mean, it was the idea was not to go crazy, because I have these fully formed songs in my head and I had to get them out. And I mean, I would hear things that I couldn't possibly play, so I would just do my best. And if I couldn't play a solo, I could certainly hum it, or vocalize it, or whatever.
Right.
And but then over time you start to learn, like, oh, maybe the guitar and the bass shouldn't be playing the same thing. Maybe the organ shouldn't have a bass note. That things like that. Just because it sounds better. You can certainly go to school and learn these things too. That's why I said it took me a long time, because it was all just kind of trial and error. But there's something. It's very powerful to be able to hear things and then bring them to life without much assistance. I mean, that to me it's like a superpower.
Yes.
And
like you're a world
I
leader.
really enjoy it. Yeah. And that's not even, I mean, I'm not even talking about lyrics yet. That's just this music that I hear in my head. So I don't I'm very grateful, for this superpower, because I know there are a lot of people who just write. I don't mean just write, like, but who don't write the music. They write the lyrics, and vice versa.
Right. True.
Or people who kind of have melodies and aren't sure what to do with them, and so I'll never complain about having like I always say, I have 10,000 voices in my head, but I don't complain. So they're giving me fully formed songs.
Yeah, I remember when you said that, or a version of that a few weeks ago, and it really blew my mind, because that was that idea. I think you might have said that you just had to get the song out.
Yeah.
Like, you hear it formed in your head, and you've got to find a way to get that, I was going to say on wax, but whatever, like, really, like get it out to where other people can hear it, that, it's living now. Right?
Yeah.
And I do think it's like, and I want to, because this is a great other point you made. That's a strength of self-producing or self-anything, that if you don't happen to be in a community where your next door neighbor's a great drummer and somebody else is a great engineer, whatever it is, that you have enough of all of these skills that you can bring it to fruition in a certain way. But it, like you said, it can also be a burden and a crutch and a hindrance in some ways, because just instinctively, and the more you do, the more you know that there are people out there who do some of those things better than you ever could. And wouldn't you rather just focus on the things that you do best and that are closest to your heart rather than spread yourself so thin?
Yeah. Well, I think the dream is to be a Quincy Jones. You know, if I could just have a studio, people come in the morning and I say, here's your part, and here's your part,
Yes.
and here's your part. 1, 2, 3, go. You know, I mean, that would, and it could just be a revolving door of musicians and ideas. That really is the goal, because it's, you know, it's out of necessity that I play things and sometimes sing things. Like, I don't necessarily want to sing all of my songs, but I can't afford to pay someone else to do them. So I'll get as close as I can, you know, and then if Adele hears my song on Spotify and says, that's lovely, I would like to cover that, and have at it. You know?
Yeah.
But that's the dream. Yeah.
Is to be Quincy Jones. That was actually my next question, which you've already answered, which is economics plays such a big part in all of that. And we are lucky to live in an age where we can make a decent version of what we have in our heads, and other people can hear it. And you know, and if you do it that way, they can hear it all over the world if that's how you distribute. But and my question is with that has always been, well, people are now so used to hearing things, million selling or whatever records that have been made in somebody's bedroom. You know, whether it's the, you know, Billie Eilish and Phineas or you know, anybody else, that and then most often, more often than anything else, as an MP3, which is, you know, almost the lowest quality you can get, that it's in a way equalizing what is considered finished music.
Yeah.
So that I had this crisis where, so my first few albums were all, you know, other than my home cassettes, which that's where it started, I eventually kind of, you know, moved into doing stuff in studios in Jersey and Philly, and I did several EPs and a couple of albums that way. And then at a certain point, I'm like, well, I don't have the money to keep doing this. So the last one I did like that was half in the studio and the rest was at home with a partner I was with at the time, and he was amazing at what he did, and he taught me a lot of that self-production stuff. And I used Ableton and, you know, kind of the DAWs. And since then, everything I've done has been in my studio. And it's been quite a lot. I mean, from basically the last 10 years has been all of that. And, you know, you listen to music enough, you know, the difference between something that had $1 million thrown at it or $50,000,
right,
or $5, you know, and that's fine. But what I've also found is that people who like what you do, non-industry people, they don't care. They hear a song, they like it, and if it's done well enough to where there's not a hiss or there's not like weird tones that are affecting your ear or whatever, that they're going to absorb it in any way. So the reason why this next album I'm doing, I'm titling parentheses lo-fi, is because, and it's kind of the old term lo-fi, not the ambient chill wave or whatever, but is that I'm not going to hesitate to put this stuff out and put it out everywhere. And I will qualify it to some degree as saying, I did this myself. And I am perfectly happy if someone else wants to, like you said, record it, or if some producer comes along and says, let's redo the whole album, you know, put it out again. That's fine. But it's not going to stop me from sitting on all of this music.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it's I struggle with that. I've been sitting on an album since 2008. How long is that? 16 years now. Not the whole time. I mean, there were some tracks lost. I had to do some re-recording and stuff. But basically, I have a vision for this album, and I'm not going to release it until I can finance that vision, because I've heard what it can be, and I will accept nothing less than that. I make demos every week for my Patreon supporters. And those I just do, on my laptop, and I try to mix them. I enjoy mixing. I'm not very good at it, but I love the process. I spend hours trying. So, I mix them as best I can and get my ideas out, and maybe, I'll revise the lyrics at some point. But I really enjoy doing that and making demos for them. And some of them I've released with I've had someone mix and master them, but just productions that I've done on my laptop. And it's just not, I don't know. Sometimes I'm happy with it. I'm not going to say I'm not happy with it all the time. But for the most part, I saw this interview with Nancy Wilson, not the guitarist, the singer, about a month ago, floating around the internet. And she was describing what a performance was, or what a record was, going into the studio. And she said they would go into the studio, everybody would come, they would know their parts, they would do one take, maybe two. The point wasn't to perfect it. The point wasn't to rehearse. The point of a recording is it captures a performance. And when I heard that, I thought, yes, this is how I feel about this album I've been sitting on. It's a performance, the three of us in the studio, rock trio. And it's like, it's a capsule, it's a moment in time. And I want to preserve the integrity of that by, making sure that it's produced, mixed very well, and then marketed, the right way. As much juice behind it as possible. So I wouldn't say that one way is right and one way is the other. I'm telling you that I straddle. Sometimes I'm okay with that, but it's, at least for this project that I'm working on, I'm definitely the Nancy Wilson way,
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And we're going to stop here for my mid episode break, partly because we have to restart this soon. But I want to pick this up right where we're leaving off. So everybody out there, hang out for my usual mid-roll. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with Amelia Ray. Hey, so I was going to do the usual and just list all of the links that I'd love for you to check out, but I realized that everything you need to know and everywhere you need to go is at nickdimatteo.com. That really is the hub. I list all the links in every episode just in case, but nickdimatteo.com is where I put everything that I do. If you want to know more about this podcast, whether it's the audio version or the YouTube version at youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre or wherever else the podcast shows up, or if you want to support the podcast at patreon.com/musicisnotagenre, just go to nickdimatteo.com. It's all there. If you want to check out my full discography of original music and covers for my band REC, REC, and beyond, it's at nickdimatteo.com, including all the streaming and social links for wherever you listen to music and wherever you check out your soch. My acting clips are there. My voiceover clips are there. Graphic design, my blog, and most especially, it's the best place to contact me. If you go to nickdimatteo.com/contact, or just hit the contact is on every single page. You can send me a note, say hello, ask me any questions you'd like. You get a newsletter a few times a month. And if you have a project of your own and need work done for it, whether it's audio editing or music or voiceover or graphic design, or if you have an event and you need live music, go to nickdimatteo.com, contact me, say hello, let me know what you need. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Let's get back to the show. All right, we're back. Thanks for hanging out for that mid-roll. As always, hey, by the way, I am trying to raise funds to beef up season 7. So if patreon.com/musicisnotagenre would be an awesome place to be. I also put a GoFundMe on every episode now. And part of that is kind of what we're talking about, which has to do with production values. I'm going to bring you this no matter what, as I have sort of, done with the music that I do. But I have a real sympathy and empathy for what you were saying, Amelia, before the break, which is that struggle between wanting to get your music out there and doing it the best you can do with the resources that you have, which are often, as I know well, not much, but enough to get you to a certain point, and then knowing on so many levels that the beauty of it and the fullness of it can be even better achieved if you had a team working with you and the money to pay that team. And my I think one of my goals is with this album to put it out and then use it as a promotional tool to find people who I can work with and hopefully raise funds for it and the whole thing. Because I also have that, man, I really love, and I love that people are loving these tunes, but then I'll listen to it on like 3 different, speakers or whatever and be like, man, why was the voice perfect there? And now it's way too loud over here. I can't, I know there's that mastering that happens where it's as close as it can be to the same on every single, system. That that's not something that I can do,
Yeah. It's, I had that with my last single in January. I released a song called Dream. And well, my last single when we were recording it. Hopefully it won't be my last single when this episode comes out.
Yeah.
But I was on the road. So, you're on the road, you're listening to everything in headphones. You don't have monitors or anything, So I recorded it. And I made a basic mix and that I sent to the mixing engineer and said, this is more or less what I'm looking for, just to give him an idea. And he sent the mix back and, and it was beautiful and it was mastered. It was just wonderful. And I would take the headphones out and listen to the laptop and, wherever I was staying at a friend's house, I would try to plug it into their speaker. I was like, yeah, this is great. This is great. So off the song went. And, song was born, song was released. I got here to Memphis and I put it on my mother's smart TV, I was like, oh, let's put this song on. I was like, I'm going to cover my ears. It's like, what is this mess?
So what were some specific things you heard that you were like, oh, I didn't intend that?
Oh, it wasn't. I mean, it's not a bad mix. It's not bad. It just didn't sound like what it sounded like the 8,000 times I listened to it in my headphones.
Yes.
And that is something that's the sort of thing that I'd like to be removed from that part of the process. I would like to just give my tracks to someone, pay them enough money to say, you are a professional. You know what it's going to sound like on my mom's smart television. Like, I don't want to have to think about that. You know what it's going to sound like on this guy's boombox and that lady's Walkman and my mom's television because you're a professional and that's what you do. So here's the money. Go do that and make it sound the same on all of them. And then I never have to experience that again.
Oh, God, you put it in. I mean, you hit me right in the gut when you said, I'd like to be removed from the process like that. Oh, my God. I've been talking with this a person who's kind of a promoter and a social media marketer and all that. And I'm hoping to find some funds to employ her on a monthly basis, if possible. And while we were talking, she said, or if you can't spend that much, I can show you how to do it yourself. And I was like, that's exactly what I don't want from this.
Yeah.
Like, because knowing me, I will learn how to do it myself. And then that's the 60th thing that I'm doing every week. And I know I'm not that good at it. Like, just please take it away.
Oh, no, we don't need to be doing more things. Not only as independent musicians, because, that's been the whole bag the last few years. It's like, if you want to be successful, that you're never working hard enough. You've got to learn how to produce. You've got to learn how to market. What do you mean you don't write press releases? What do you mean you don't know how to make beautiful graphics on Canva? And all of these, so you have to do all of that. In addition, you have to pay to do all of that because all of these things come with some subscription fee. And it drives me crazy because to me, it's the same thing as self-checkout. I refuse to use self-checkout, not only because people need jobs and to me, using self-checkout is taking potential employment away from somebody. That's one of the reasons. But the main reason I don't use self-checkout is that I don't work here. Why am I working?
Right.
Why am I paying to work? I came in
Right.
here to spend money, not to bag my own groceries. You know, I don't know how to put the eggs in the cereal. Like, look at me. That's not my job. I came in here to spend money. That's your job. You do it. I am the consumer.
Mm.
I am not the employee.
Oh,
And so much of our world now is just we are willingly paying to work for jobs for which we are not qualified.
yeah.
So I definitely try to cut down. I mean, you know, when you're an independent musician and you can't afford people, yes, you're going to have to learn some things. You're going to have to learn how to make an Instagram story, or you know, but the sooner you can get that sort of stuff off your plate, the better, because you know we've got to be writing music, and there are people who love doing that sort of things. We don't like it.
Right.
We
Right.
hate it. We complain about it all the time.
No, all the time. Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
But yeah.
When you
Yeah.
meet someone who does enjoy it, you can tell the difference.
Oh,
They get so excited about, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start by promoting this one, you know, single of yours. And then the next month I'm going to do a different single. And then we're going to see which single tracks better and who it attracts and all this stuff. And I'm like, I have a headache.
Wah, wah, wah,
Yeah.
wah, wah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I, you know, I kind of, I won't say I struggle with this, because I do firmly come down on the side of it would be better to have the resources to pay people who do it better and love it. But I see some of them are friends, but most of them are just kind of like, you know, people that I've run across looking for things online, who they've made their money at some point in their lives doing I'll say an actual thing, not, and I mean, everything's an actual thing, but like they were musicians or producers or whatever it was. And now the money they're making is courses to teach somebody else to do it. And I'm always like, and I don't do a lot of this on the podcast, but anytime I do, I say to people, any knowledge I have of anything, I'm going to give that to you for free. Because it's hard enough for, you know, for us to do what we do. And then we have to pay for the knowledge that then forces us to do the work yet again.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So, and it makes me almost, I think at a certain point, I might just do a short episode on how can we all find ways to find those patrons and people and other jobs or whatever it is to finance what we're doing, so that we don't ever have to do again something that is just not in our wheelhouse.
Well, you know, that might be a way to approach it, because, okay, let's, you know, what do they say in therapy and in all sorts of good, like, stop it with the I statements or turn it around. How can we help others? So let's say one of our patrons has a niece or nephew or kid who wants to get into digital marketing. They want to help their child. And you might say, okay, I need a digital marketer. So tell your friends to join my Patreon, and then I can hire your child. You know, I don't know if that's the cleanest way for it to work, but just starting to think in ways like this, because it's following the line of giving away knowledge for free. There's enough for everybody. We just have to figure out how to put the pieces together so that we're helping each other and not working against each other.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
I'd be more than happy to, if I had 2 more patrons and that meant that I could employ a high school student even, or college student getting into digital marketing, I'd be more than happy to set that money aside for that, because they're learning, they're helping me. And then the people who have joined the patron, they're getting something in return, and they're helping 2 people, not just one.
Well, that's great.
So maybe we should start, you know, trying to find avenues or, you know, instances where we can do more of that, because I think that's really going to be the way. Nepotism for all.
Yes. Yeah. And you know what? It's like, you know, I've thought about nepotism in a lot of ways, because my, you know, father is a musician, and I kind of inherited what I do from him. And not that I got much benefit other than the learning, which is great. But when you look at like, oh, there's some new movie star I've never heard of before, and wow, good for them. And you find out that their family's been in the business since the 20s or whatever, you know, it's like, all right. So it's a kind of a class system, whatever. But the light side of nepotism is the idea that we are a community, and if we have family or friends that we call family that can help us and we can help them, like
Right.
the meeting that we went to, I was talking about this band that I just joined. Well, part of the reason I said yes was because now this guy is playing in my band and we're not paying each other, but we're trading. It's a
Right.
barter system, and
Right.
to be able to do that with things even outside of the actual creation of music, like marketing or all that,
Mm-hmm.
or the mixing and mastering, I feel like whatever downsides there are to the internet, and there's been downsides to everything since the beginning of time, the upside is we can much easier find communities that
Yeah.
people that don't have to live in the same town, and
Right.
maybe find ways to do trades like that where, like, oh, I don't know how to play a certain instrument, but I'm great at mastering. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I'll play that instrument for you if you master this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's essentially what we're doing. We just, with currency, it just kind of makes it more impersonal. But nepotism is only a problem when you're on the outside of the circle. And in fact, that's what we spend our time doing, is building community. I mean, that's why I'm here with you right now, is because we met somewhere
Right.
and we have our own community. And instead of inviting someone you didn't know, you invited me because you know me.
Yes.
So, that's how I get to be on your show. And that's how most of the time we get to do most things in life. It's just, I guess, being more aware of that and how prevalent it is and how prevalent our opportunities are. And then sort of, instead of judging ourselves by what we don't have or looking outside, just kind of looking within our communities that we already have. There's plenty of resources there that we probably aren't tapping into or trying to help. A lot of times it's just, you help somebody else, you help your neighbor bring the groceries in, and you start talking to them and they're like, hey, I happen to be a big wig at Sony, I'm
Yeah.
sure somebody's been signed that way.
Oh, yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah.
And I do think a lot of it is uh we don't talk enough, just casually. There's so
Yeah.
much time is spent what am I going to post today? What am I going to promote? Or what am I going to share? Even if it's free, what am I going to share? And not
Yeah.
just thinking about, well, we can have conversations with people. I did a gig last night and I may have found a drummer for my band, because the
There,
guy was
see?
like, he's in school or whatever, which is great, but he's an incredible drummer. And he's like, I'm looking for new projects. I'm like, oh, okay. And it's simply because I talked about something that,
Mm-hmm.
if I didn't bring it up at all, if I was just like, yeah, we're a band, we're playing tonight, cool, good luck to you, whatever, then we never would have had that conversation.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I think it's the way to bring up Comrade. Actually, I mentioned Quincy Jones as being, I mean, we know he's the dude, but sort of like the goal, if you could have that sort of resource and power. But one of his really close friends, who unfortunately passed away recently, Clarence Avant, there's a really great documentary on Netflix called The Black Godfather about him.
Okay.
And to this day, nobody knows what his job was. He was in the music industry for all of his life, basically, like since the 60s or 50s, maybe even. But nobody knows what he did. Like, nobody could say he was a A&R guy or he was a record label. I mean, he kind of did all of that. But his talent was in figuring out what people needed when they needed it. And he knew exactly who to put them in touch with. And the reason that he did that is because he was constantly making connections with people and remembering things. And, oh, you need a guy, and people would call him up for all sorts of things, I mean, politicians, people outside of the music industry. It was just, I know a guy,
God, I've got to see that.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. I've seen it like 4 times. I love it. It's one of my favorite films.
I've always been just mesmerized and kind of I don't quite understand the skill. People who can get things done, who can make connections like that, who can
Mm-hmm.
somehow have a way of approaching things where there is always a yes somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah. That's a superpower too.
Yeah.
And I don't think we can't all be that good at it, but we certainly can. I think we can do it more than we think we can.
Yep.
You know, just like you said, you met this drummer last night, and now even if you don't end up using him, you might refer him to someone, and then he might come back and say, "Thank you so much that you did that, because now I'm playing with Pat Metheny." I mean, you just never know.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah. Wow. That's true. You don't know where things are going to lead. And in fact, the whole reason I was even there last night was partly because of this shirt, the Wombats.
The Wombats.
It's a, British band. They're kind of an electro power pop. I sometimes, compare what I do to them in some ways. And I was having a conversation with a fill-in guitarist in my cover band about power pop music. And we both are huge fans of Fountains of Wayne. And I think he was the other guy who mentioned Jellyfish. And
I was about to say,
yes, exactly. And at the end of that conversation, it was a 2.5-hour car ride to Philadelphia for this gig. He said, we played some of our music for each other, and he's like, "I love your voice. I've got some tracks on my upcoming album that need backup vocals. Would you do that?" And then his bass player decided to leave, and he's like, "You play bass. Would you like to play for me?" And I'm like, "Yes, if you play for me." And it was only because we talked about power pop.
Yep. That's it. That's all you got to do is talk to people.
Yeah.
I mean, we have the answers. We know the answers. And in case we forget, the answers are always the lyrics to every Rainbow Connection, Sesame Street song, everything we've ever grown up with.
Wow.
We just forget.
Wow.
We get selfish, and the world tries to beat innocence out of us. But we have all the answers. They haven't ever changed. So, but now I'm glad that you mentioned this, because I don't understand how you've gone this long without knowing a Jellyfish is.
Mm-hmm.
Where were you?
I don't know. I would love to know, because that was in a bit of a sweet spot of me like discovering new music when they were out, and I completely missed them. Completely.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Oh man. Well, lucky for you, unlucky for you, but in your early stages, lucky for you, you don't have that much to catch up on.
Right.
The output was not, unfortunately, very limited. I was going to wear I wore it the other day though, but I have a Licorice Quartet t-shirt. And then I thought, he won't even know who that is, because he doesn't know Jellyfish.
No, I wouldn't have known. Yeah. I would have said, what four flavors are you talking about? I don't know. I like it. It's like initially when you were telling your story, just you went from like, I don't even remember all of them, but like from Bobby Gentry to Debbie Gibson to Tull to Rush to Chili Peppers, like, whoa, and Lenny Kravitz and all that, like, man, yeah. And a lot of crossover stuff I listened to as well, which is cool. But yeah. And now you're adding Jellyfish to that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I love it all. I enjoyed your what was the last one I listened to? Oh, the Two Hit Wonders episode.
Oh, right. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
That was really great. I was like, oh yeah, I remember that song. Oh yeah, I remember that band. And then some of them I was like you, very adamant, like, no way they were a one-hit wonder.
It's great. Yes. Right. Yeah. It's funny. A lot of what I'm finding, because this whole podcast thing just started out a long time ago, but like it was a blog and whatever. And then I just started to decide to talk. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do with it, but I'm starting to find some common themes in everything. And of course, one of the name of the thing, music is not a genre, but another one is this sort of divide or struggle between the musicians, the creators, and the people who disseminate the music, the distributors, the record companies, the radio station, whatever it is, the marketers, and how that has played such a part in whether or not a band has lasted, or whether or we even remember them at all. And so a lot of what I do it's, I don't spend an entire episode necessarily on somebody who's totally unknown. I may at some point, but I'll always point out something in some episode about how we should know more about this band or this artist or this song, or even this
Yeah.
style of music. And the only reason we don't is because it didn't make enough money for somebody.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's, it's sad, but it is a business. I do understand that. It just seems like now it seems a shame for, let's say, artists pre-internet days. Because now, let's say I had a hit record tomorrow and I was everywhere, and then the next day my label decided to drop me and not put any more money into it. Well, with that little bit of currency that I have, I could book, a solid tour for myself,
Right.
just because I've had my 15 seconds. And if I kept at it and were vigilant, I could probably maintain a steady career for a decade, just doing, even if it were county fairs or something, I could say I had that one hit. It's much easier for me to do on my own, is what I'm saying now with the internet. Well, in the 70s and 80s, how are you even going to find these venues to write them and tell them, hey, I'm that 15-second woman, can I come play next week? It was a completely different ball game. So, I'm sure there are a lot of artists that we would kind of know more, or at least would have had more of a sustainable careers off of just one hit, had they had access like we do now.
Wow. And that's something I found with that two hit wonders was that whether the band was bands that only had that little bit of fame, which, by the way, 15-Second Woman is a great song title. That they then went on to these extensive careers touring or some other in some other capacity where they fell off the face of the earth for everybody else, but they're either their core fans or somewhere else. Or take a band like, Simple Minds, who was not a one-hit wonder. They had like at least 3 hits. But for those of you who don't, you forget about me from, Breakfast Club. They have been releasing albums consistently ever since then, and had enough, I think, fairly consistent success in Europe, which a lot of bands who fail here because it's a ridiculous market do much better overseas.
Yeah.
And I had zero idea any of that because no one was talking about it here.
No. I had a similar thing with, I don't know if you remember who Keith Sweat is.
Oh God. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. So, Keith Sweat, big in R&B, early 90s.
Yeah.
And then nothing, by the time, Ursher and Drew Hill came along, you never heard of the guy again.
Yeah.
And I was in Amsterdam. It must have been 2004, I think, first time, somewhere around there. Anyway, I went to, my cousin was dating a man, and they're now married, but anyway, went to his house, and I was looking through his CD collection, and the man had 15 Keith Sweat CDs. This is a Dutchman in Amsterdam. Whoa. 15 in 2004. And I said, what are these? I didn't know Keith Sweat had 15 albums. And he was like, oh yeah, I got my tickets. He's coming to town, and there were posters everywhere all over the city, like Keith Sweat in concert. People, it's like, this is amazing. Keith Sweat is alive and well in Amsterdam. Wow. In the Netherlands. So that was the first time that I really, because it's true, we are so polarized might be the word in the States. If we don't see or hear, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that that's not the case, especially for Keith Sweat.
No, I'm watching this documentary on, I think, Hulu called Camden, and it's about that neighborhood in London that has an incredibly rich music history. As far as like modern music, about a 45-year history, and it helped to break artists as diverse as Madness and Coldplay and Dua Lipa and Lil Sims and just like it runs the range of styles and eras all over the place. And one thing they say about it is that people who are there just love music.
Yeah.
And I've found that to be the case in to a degree in New Orleans. I come from Philly. I have an affinity for it, and I find that Philly is very much accepts music there, even music they don't know, much more than New York City in a lot of ways. Although you'll find pockets in New York City, but that even people from Britain will say it's just more in their blood, and they are more appreciative of people who play live music and even especially original live music. And there's just something about our culture that I can't make a blanket statement because there are tons of people in the States who also feel that way, and there are communities that feel that way, but the country as a whole doesn't really have that feeling. And I think that's why these bands, like I did a whole episode on King's X because a fan of mine said, do it, right? All I knew about them was their name and the fact that they played a certain kind of music, which, was described differently. And I find they've had this 40-year career, just put out new music. Like they never, other than when the one guy got sick, they never stopped. They just, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Because they had a sort of a hit and their follow-up didn't do as well. And the label said, fuck you, we're done with you. And they said, fuck you anyway. We're going to have a career regardless of what you say.
Yeah.
And they kept on. And any band to me, successful or not, or whatever, however you define success, famous or not, I'll say, who is able to have a career that long or even 20 years or whatever they're heroes to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely. I mean, if you can get up every day and keep doing it, then that's it. It's just really one foot in front of the other. And it shows like clearly that's what you were meant to be doing. If you can do that for 40 years, because it's not sitting behind a desk. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of attitude. It's a lot of disappointment and frustration and pain. And, I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years now, and I'm just getting to the point where I don't want to carry an amp around. I've still got 40 years ahead of me, hopefully, of doing this, I got but you look at like the Stones, what else were those guys going to do? Can you imagine them doing anything else? Yeah. No, they just, you can tell when, that's just what people were born to do. And you love it and you just keep doing it. You keep at it. Yeah.
I mean, I just had a brief conversation with an old friend of mine. We met in an acting class like 20 some years ago, and we've done projects together here and there. And he commented on something. He sent an email out about a show he's in off Broadway, which I was thrilled about. So I answered it. And he answered back and said, I'm so thrilled to see you're still making music. And I was like, and it kind of took me back a little bit, like, whoa, okay. I'm glad that you're seeing that, but was there another answer? Like my answer to him was, I don't know how to live any other way.
Yeah.
And you can go through periods in your life where you're like, should I be doing something else? I'm not making enough money. Maybe if I do this instead. And if you do it long enough, it's almost like you're beating it into yourself that you're like, no, this is what I was meant to do,
Yeah. Well, that, and then you age out of all the other jobs, which has been kind of a relief, I gotta say.
Yeah. God.
I send my resume off and they're like, whoa, where did you learn how to write resumes? And I'm like, in the 90s?
I hate it.
Like, where do I mail this? What's your address?
Oh, man.
Yeah. So, but it is true, it's like LL says, don't call it a comeback.
Oh, been here for years. Yeah. God, yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I was so excited to talk to you today, because I know you have that history, and I know you've been through so much of what I've been through. I mean, I think so. I guess in terms of professional releases, it's been maybe 35 years or so for me. But now I'm realizing this year, the first time I ever spent, well, it was my dad's money to go into a professional studio was
Mhm.
40 years ago today. I was a
All
kid in
right.
school.
Today?
Yeah, I'm sorry, not
Oh,
today, but yeah.
oh,
I
I was
actually
gonna
have to.
clap, but I guess I can
No,
clap anyway.
yeah. Now I have to
I
find
got
out the
excited
date.
about
So yeah,
today.
maybe when this airs, it'll be that date. I don't. You wouldn't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's just call it today.
All right, I'm
But yeah,
clapping.
but
40 years
it was a
today, man.
song I wrote called Radiation Blues, and it was about the the Hiroshima and all of that, and I made it
Hmm.
into this kind of a parody song in a way, and yeah, and it was a full production, the whole damn thing at this Sigma Sound, which is used to be a well-known studio in Philly, and
Hmm.
I got the bug then, and I never let it go. So
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. It's not to be let go. It is a lovely bug to have, I gotta say. And
hmm,
especially just like the nice thing about, we're talking about lack of genre or diversity is that you get to play all of that stuff. You know, if you're a bass player, you can play bass in, I mean, maybe not any band, but you can play any kind of music that you like. You can write any kind of music that you like, and that to me is just like, I'm working on a project now that's going to result in an opera ballet. Never written an opera ballet before, but why not?
wow,
This album I've been sitting on for how many years did I say? 16 years
16,
is a
yeah.
soul rock opera. I remember telling that to a music journalist, and he says, "What's a soul rock opera?" And I said, "You know what a rock opera is, don't you?" He's like, "Yeah, yeah, like Tommy." And I said, "It's a soul rock
Yeah,
opera."
how hard is that? Yeah.
Oh, so but then I made a note to myself. I was like, tapped into something new here. Like if this
Mm,
learned music journalist has never heard this before.
yep, you coined it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. God,
Oh,
yeah.
I have to trademark it by the time this episode comes out, because
All right, I'll
somebody will
give you a
hear
heads
this
up.
and run out and.
Yeah, right. Now they they made it up. Uh-uh. Oh
Oh,
God. Well, I think we're just about at the end of our time here. So,
all right.
is there anything you want to leave us with? Any thoughts?
I mean, it's been fun sharing stories with you. I could go on talking about music and music history and learning things for days and days. So thank you for having me. And I don't know. What you mean? Like some words of encouragement, perhaps, for some people who are listening. Quit
Sure.
your day job.
Ah,
How about that?
one of my favorite things I have ever heard. Yeah. I did that in 2020 when the pandemic hit, and I
Yeah.
never regretted it, not once.
Oh.
That's awesome. Well, yes. And before I say anything else, where can people find you?
Okay. AmeliaRay.net. I'm old school. Join the mailing list, please. I got a website and mailing list, because you can follow me on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and X and
Mm,
YouTube, but you might not ever see anything that I post. So please join the mailing list. It's the best way. And I answer every email that I receive. So if you want to write me back and talk about Jellyfish, or tell me that I'm wrong about my musings about segregated billboard charts and the
yeah.
impact of disco on radio,
Uh-huh.
then you could send me an email. But and Patreon, if you want to join the party and get all of the things, all the behind the scenes, patreon.com/Amelia Ray, as in
Excellent.
Earhart Charles.
Earhart Charles, thank you for joining me. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much, Nick.
Absolutely. And all those links will be included here. And you contact Amelia, as she said, and contact me if you want to know anything else. Thank you all for watching and listening. As always, my objectives here are music, conversation, and connection. I will talk to you next week.
Prevent you, preacher. prepared, fading unaware, locked away inside the house of prayer, green lighting the whole affair. So good and evil, but in between is where live the people. So you don't wanna hear the choir sing. That doesn't mean it isn't happening. You just can't stand a confrontation within a happy congregation. Turn your head, close your eyes. Later you'll apologize. In the great beyond, the stand accused. Another one of your limp excuses. If the blame lies with the whole damn nation, your hands are stained by association. A chill. Things like this don't happen in Orderville. No, they just don't happen. Not in our little town.
Don't happen in Orderville.